Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Insights from Women Leaders series. My name is Rola Kaakeh. I'm going to be the host today for this session and for the series in general. For a little bit of background on the series, we launched the Insights from Women Leaders series in October of 2020 to highlight the journeys and contributions of various women leaders who share their insights on a range of topics impacting their industries, our communities, and their role in shaping the future. Our guests have included leaders from various prestigious and reputable institutions. Their backgrounds are diverse, their accomplishments many, and the insights and perspectives they provided are extremely valuable. Now, the goal of this series is to learn from women thought leaders and decision makers to empower current and future leaders, both men and women, to positively impact organizations and communities. Now, diversity of thought, experiences, industries, education, and training is important to us as it highlights the mosaic of perspectives represented in different settings that help drive decision-making and positive change. Now, I will have about a 40-minute conversation with the leader, structured using questions that we've traditionally asked all of our guest leaders. Now, we ask the guest leaders similar questions on purpose. This allows you to see the differences in responses and lived experiences. After that, I'll ask questions sent to us from the public prior to the sessions. And so for anyone who's listening for future events, you are able to submit your questions ahead of time for the guest leader. But now it's time to welcome our guest leader today, Dr. Saira Haque. Dr. Haque is a Senior Director of Clinical Informatics in Pfizer's Medical Affairs Group. She has over 20 years of experience in health information technology operations, consulting, and research positions. She focuses on using technology for novel ways to improve quality, outcomes, and efficiency for patients and public health, with specific interests in health information exchange, care coordination, virtual care, and real-world evidence. Dr. Haque holds a Master's of Health Services Administration from the University of Michigan School of Public Health, where I also went as well, and a PhD in Information Science and Technology from Syracuse University School of Information Studies. She's also a fellow of the American Medical Informatics Association. Welcome, and we're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we're going to start with the same question we ask everyone, and that is, did you expect to be where you are today?
That's a good question. No, I didn't. Actually, when I did my undergrad and when I was at Michigan, I didn't even really know about health informatics, let alone imagine that it would be my career. And so I really kind of fell into it. After I graduated from Michigan, I worked in management consulting, and I almost randomly got assigned to a particular group within the health managed care practice. So originally I was in the strategy group, and then HIPAA came along, and everyone was very interested in aligning systems and processes at the same time as trying to figure out HIPAA compliance. And so I fell into this group that was doing all of that sort of work, and then also was involved in health IT implementations. And so I went all around the country implementing different types of health IT systems. Now, this was the 90s, so the systems were not perhaps as robust as they are today. And so, I have implemented things like custom billing systems that, now nobody really does that, or rudimentary types of EHRs that now, a lot of places use vendors and that sort of thing. And in that course of that work, I really got to see a lot of different providers and payers. And when the time came for me to sort of, decide the next step of my career, I really wanted to stay in health IT and informatics. And so that decision and that kind of happenstance assignment in the beginning has really shaped all of my career, because I found that I really enjoyed informatics and I really enjoy data, and I'm a data-driven kind of person. And so that's really shaped all of the rest of the decisions that I made throughout my career, moving on to hospital administration, my PhD, and then what I've done thereafter. And so, my 20-something-year-old self probably didn't really even know about the possibilities that were available now when I'm, significantly older and more senior in my career.
That's great. It's always great to kind of sometimes sit back and think like, oh, did I really think I would end up here? And it's really exciting the way like things turn for the better and to be able to see what your true interests are. Now, generally in this series, we always start with the future first, and then we'll come back and talk about current things that you're working on. And so as you look forward, so we looked a little bit backwards, but as you look forward, what's in your future? What do you want your legacy to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in terms of the future of my work, it's really an exciting time to be in informatics. And there's a lot of changes in terms of advancements in technology. And when I say advancements in technology, not only does that cover things like EHRs, which is what people typically think about, but also things like the increase in FDA cleared wearable devices. So things such as consumer wearables, such as smartwatches, which have been FDA cleared for the detection of AFib, things such as Bluetooth-enabled continuous glucose monitors, devices, et cetera. And so a lot of those things sort of existed before, but weren't necessarily integrated as part of the care continuum, as part of the care path. And so that's one thing that's pretty exciting. In addition, there are some advancements in technology for data and analytics. There's a lot more data out there, and then that's great in some ways because we can analyze it, but there need to be advanced techniques and that sort of thing, AI, that's artificial intelligence or machine learning and other types of algorithms. And so I see myself getting involved in that a little bit more to build upon the work I've already done. And then also there's aspects of real world data and real world evidence that I've been involved with. And there's always going to be a place for the clinical trial, but real world data and real world evidence really involve what happens in practice, so outside of the environment of the clinical trial. And so I've been interested in that and using the advancements in technology to inform advancements there. And then the fourth area that I've been focusing on and that I hope to continue to focus on is care coordination. People are getting sicker and there's more specialization of care, which means that there's data located all over the place. And that also means more people need to be involved. And so that points to the need for health information exchange, technology-enabled exchange, and really focusing more on care coordination. So those are the four areas that I see myself continuing to build upon. Now, the second part of your question was about legacy, which I think is interesting because in my, in the academic realm or in research, the main currency is dissemination. So that involves things like papers and publications and doing talks. And so certainly that's part of my legacy, but really it reflects the work that you're doing. And so overall, the overarching theme of my work has been using technology to improve care. And so I hope that my legacy kind of, now and going forward is, different ways to do that and kind of the breadth of ways that are available. And so I feel like that breadth is really important because people often think of technology as maybe a monolith, or they kind of have a narrow view of how it can be used or is used. And my goal, and hopefully have been working to achieve that, is to really expand the ideas behind that.
Do you find yourself, when you think of legacy, and we've had this with different guests here, they either simplify legacy, right? And like they make it seem like, and for like that it's very straightforward and it's just, how I make an impact. And some have really made it a very grand thing and feel kind of the weight of that word. For you, when you first saw this question or thought about this question, did you feel like, wow, like, what is it that I truly want? Or is legacy meant to be simple for you so that you can achieve it?
That's a good question because you're right. Legacy can mean a lot of different things to different people. And I actually was thinking about it in a couple of different ways because in one, it's the impact of my work. Mm-hmm. How have I made a mark? But then from a personal perspective, you also think about legacy that way sometimes. And in a way, it's the same thing. How have I made my mark? So, regardless of if it's personally, how have you made your mark in the world that way, or professionally, at the end of the day, regardless of the nuances there, legacy is something that I think perpetuates after. And does that mean that it's work, something you've left like a product, or is it a building block that you have started that other people can build upon, or both, or something in between? There's a lot of different ways in which you can make a legacy. And I don't think you necessarily have to be as grand as sometimes the word sounds very grand. Honestly, even if, treating people well and making the world a better place, even if it's in very small ways, can also be part of your legacy. And sometimes it seems weird to talk about that in a conversation about leadership, but I really think all these concepts are interrelated.
Yeah, for sure. Wonderful. Yeah, exactly. So how have you found, now you are very intentional, like the way right now you talked about your future, what you're hoping, kind of the spaces and areas you want to make an impact, you want to work towards. How have you found though that your past, maybe present experiences really shaped your future outlook for these areas?
Yeah, that's a good question, because you don't really start intentional, or if you do, it doesn't always stay there.
Mm-hmm.
So, those areas are really the product of a number of years of work and experiences. I'll just go through my background a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, I came up through management consulting. That was my first kind of real job out of my master's. And then I worked for a hospital as a hospital administrator. And so when you're going around the country helping hospitals and payers implement systems, you're kind of a guest. So you go in and you get to know them very well, you know their systems and their people, but at the end of the day, you leave. When you're a hospital administrator, you go in, and I was charged with developing the compliance department as the compliance officer. And the decisions that I made, I had to live with because I had to stay there. And then however I built the department was how I was going to have to run it. And so that winds up giving you a little bit of a different mindset. And so then I had some different ideas about what I thought about information systems and data. And then from there, I went to do my PhD. So I, was a slightly older student. And from there, I moved on to research. And so all of those different types of experiences and all of the different types of projects that I've worked on have really kind of shaped my interests. And in addition, I've kind of had a different sense of what the problems are that are out there and how to solve them. Because when you are looking at a lot of different places, you get to see a common thread. When you are working at one place or looking at one spot, you really go deep. And so that's that combination that really sort of shapes what you do. And for me, it's been that combination coupled with research experience and staying on kind of the pulse of what's happening in health IT and informatics generally that have helped me think about, well, where do I want to focus and what's the mark I want to make? You can't really focus on everything, although I think it's all very interesting. And sometimes I think, gosh, I wish I could spend more time on, clinical decision support or, something else that maybe I've done some work in, but haven't, delved deeply. But at some point you kind of, have to identify a few things that you're the most interested in and build a body of work and a portfolio of work. And so that's, what I've done in my time. And as you can see, I don't have one area, I have a few. So, there's always that balance there between trying to get breadth and depth. And that's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. And I know for myself, it's something I'll probably have to continue to think about as I think about how to prioritize my time.
Yeah, there's something that I think is so wonderful to what you said, and is the guest and ownership mentality. So that when you're walking into spaces or conversations or institutions or projects, whatever, are you the guest or are you kind of the owner of it in terms of like that, having ownership and going much more in detail and feeling like you're more responsible for that. And I feel like even within the topic areas you've already kind of mentioned in terms of your areas of interest, you can be both the guest and the owner in different capacities, right? And I think many of us think that we have to be the owner of everything and kind of recognizing our place as that. And there's kind of that, there's a benefit of the guest mentality, right? Because in a guest mentality, you focus so much on understanding and listening and learning and growing. And the other one is very focused on action and ownership. And so I think that kind of combination of how you look at your past, even present experiences, really is, I think, instrumental even to a lot of the projects that you're probably working on. But love that distinction. The moment you said guest and owner of it, I was like, this is wonderful. Because it's a topic too we talk a lot about when you're in spaces or communities that are new to you or not yours. You're walking in as a guest, right? And so when you have that mentality, you're much more open. You need to understand the environment that you're in. So I think that's very powerful. Can you share some maybe challenges or failures that you've experienced that really also changed your outlook? Maybe anything that you would have done differently and made a conscious effort to change really in the future?
Yeah, there's, of course, hindsight is 2020. And so, looking back, certainly there are things that, I think, gosh, I really wish I could have had a do-over on that one, or, maybe things that, with the benefit of more experience and time, I've probably changed my approach to things a little bit more than what I used to do. So I'm a very action-oriented person. I like to jump in and get something done. And, I don't really want to spend a lot of time kind of, fiddling around. But there is some benefit to taking a little bit of time and doing a little bit more reasoned planning, to take some time and gather different perspectives from different stakeholders, from really taking the time and effort to follow change management processes. All of those things are things that perhaps I didn't spend as much time as I could have and probably should have when I was a little bit more junior in my career. And now I still am an action-oriented person, but I will purposely build in time to do those things. But then you can't, kind of gather perspectives forever. So it's that balance between gathering perspectives and getting input and getting different ideas, and then taking all that and then making a decision and then moving on from there. And so I think kind of getting that balance and trying to figure out, where do you kind of need to take decisive action, and where can you take a little bit more time, and where should you? And those are things that come with experience and with time. And so, looking back at perhaps some of the first things I led or the first projects that I ran myself versus shadowing someone, you really want to do a good job, and you're so, high test and worried about it, but then you might not always, pay attention to all of the details that you need to pay attention to. So, I think, and that's a constant process. I don't think I could say that, yes, I've mastered that now. It's more about now I know that I need to pay attention to those things. And so I make a purposeful effort to do so.
Very nice. Also, I love the data driven theme with that. So you're just like, I needed more data. I needed to understand that a little bit more. And it's true though, because oftentimes when you think like, if I had more information, if I knew more, right? And so that is the power too of data and kind of understanding that. But what we know about data is that there's so much data. And at what point, exactly like you said, is do you need to take what you have in terms of the information to make a decision, and then you can reflect on whether that was, right or wrong based off the data that you also have there. But I think the theme of the data was still very consistent within that. I'm someone too that thinks always like, is there more information that we can have? But again, if you spend so much time, even as a researcher, right? If you're thinking like you spend so much time looking for the data and less time on that, actually you can kind of go down that path. But you talked a little bit about the different areas that really excite you about the future and the different, real world evidence, for example, being one, care coordination, that type of thing. Are there other things that I think when you're looking towards the future, especially as someone, I feel like people in the technology space in general or informatics or really get excited about?
Yeah, a few things. So I've been developing a whole virtual care research portfolio for several years, even before the pandemic. And so when the pandemic hit, a lot of people who maybe were kind of thinking, virtual care, I don't care about that, were very interested, because really the whole world moved virtual in the matter of weeks or days. And so one thing that I've been thinking about is how to take the lessons that we've learned from the pandemic, coupled with advancements in technology, and really think about how to advance virtual care. And when I say virtual care, I mean it more broadly. So not just a real-time video enabled visit, but things like remote patient monitoring, or using consumer wearables, or having processes where maybe people can have real-time visits punctuated by remote monitoring, that sort of thing. And really kind of delving into what are the best ways to do that, and how do we make the most of it? And then looking at populations of interest. What are the populations we'd like to focus on? And then what are some aspects of digital literacy, health literacy, and equity that kind of underpin all of that? And so that's really something that I've been, kind of thinking about spending a little bit more time on, and I've been, working on. And then another thing, I did touch on this a little bit, is with health equity and social determinants of health. That is something that we suffer from in the United States. We have profound disparities and profound differences in outcomes. However, what people don't really realize is even if you're not personally affected, all of us as a society are affected. And there are some studies out there showing that even for people who are not affected themselves, their outcomes are worse than their counterparts in other developed nations. And it's unclear why that is, but the higher the inequity, really everyone's outcomes go down. And so I've been thinking a lot about that and looking at, kind of going back to data. Well, how do we identify data elements related to SDOH? How do we track? What do we track? And then how do we share those pieces of information? Because things such as food insecurity or housing insecurity are not necessarily documented in a consistent way. And then those pieces of information are not necessarily shared with everyone who they need to be shared with. And so all of those kinds of issues and kind of untangling those and identifying things and trying to look at how to use technology to help with some of these SDOH and equity issues is something else that I've been working on and really trying to think about how we can shape things going forward.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that, because we oftentimes talk a lot about how we're creating the technologies to kind of mimic the real world. But in reality, we don't want it to mimic the exact real world when there's all of these disparities, right? You want it to create a better world. You want it to identify, like you mentioned, like being able to collect the data and see the data and identify those in order to create better systems using that technology, not technology to mirror our real world, because like you mentioned, there are many disparities and there's several elements that we need to integrate within that. Now, we talk a lot about skill sets here and thinking about how we build ourselves. And as many of us and the audience members are thinking a lot about the future, we have to also couple that about what we think we need in terms of maybe skills or tools to address any of these future challenges or opportunities that we're all looking at. So what would you say are some, maybe skills or tools we think we need to think about?
Yeah, a couple of things. One thing that I've noticed with technology is people get intimidated by it. They think, I'm not a coder, or I don't know any of that, or I don't know, it's all confusing to me. And so one thing that I think is really important is the ability to distill complex concepts and put them into language that's easy to understand. And so I think that's an important piece, because oftentimes when we're looking at things such as inequity, or looking at things such as, well, why does it matter if we don't have equitable representation in our models, or things like that, or why does it matter? Who cares? Well, the reason that it matters, can be distilled into we want things to mirror the population at hand. But if you can't explain that in a simple way, and if you can't take a complex or a technical concept and explain it so that other people can understand it, then you won't really be able to get people on board. And you yourself might lose sight of what it is you're actually trying to solve. Because oftentimes these are complex issues with complex solutions and it's multifaceted. But if you can't distill it down and then use that as kind of your guiding light or your beacon, then I think you wind up going in a lot of different directions. So that's one thing. Another thing that I think is important is, you need to have a baseline understanding of technology for what I do. And then but you have to also know when to let go. And that's not really a tool as much as a skill, but I do think it's important, because you still need to have the understanding of what it is that the underlying code, or be able to do a code walkthrough or understand what your people are doing. But as you move forward in your career, you wind up doing less, and then doing less of the on the ground work, but then you need to direct it. You need to think strategically. And that is actually a different type of skill set. And that is something that takes a little bit of a shift. And so it's not a tool per se, but more of, a way of thinking, or kind of taking yourself out of the weeds and the day-to-day and thinking about the bigger picture and trying to think about, well, where are we trying to go and what are we trying to do? And then making tactical decisions that support that. And so those are things that I think are just really tough to kind of, you don't just get those, you don't like take a class and figure it out. It comes with time, but they're really important. And similarly, I mentioned earlier with change management, kind of applying change management skills and principles to everyday work. Whenever you're making a change, and particularly if it's a change that people are nervous about, you're going to get a lot of resistance. Things don't happen necessarily the way that you think. And the resistance might not even be overt. It might be that people just can't wrap their head around what we're trying to do. And so really taking the time to understand some basic change management principles and think about how to apply them. And it can be in a simple way. You don't necessarily need to do, all of the different steps for everything, but incorporating that into your work, I think, is really important. And so those are a few things that I think are really important to consider, for people who are maybe thinking about, well, what can I do next? Or what is something I should read about or something like that?
Yeah, those are wonderful too, because it doesn't really matter necessarily the industry that you're in or what challenge you're focusing on. I think that's pretty much consistent across the board. And like you mentioned early on, these issues are very complex. So as much as like the ability to be able to simplify complex topics is so instrumental. It's very difficult. It just seems like, how can I summarize this in a couple of sentences? Very difficult, but at the same time, extremely valuable. So definitely agree. Now, are there some challenges, like you mentioned, social determinants of health, equity, but some maybe obstacles or challenges that, keep you up at night or something that you're constantly thinking about?
Yeah, those two for sure. And then even related to that, when we're thinking about using technology and real world data and real world evidence, one big piece of that is those pieces of evidence and databases and machine learning models and et cetera, those are all based on the data that we have. And the reason I bring that up is because if people are not able to get access to care, if they are not in the system, as it were, then they won't be represented in those models. And so then we're making decisions based on models that don't have everyone in it, or that don't have everyone in it in an equitable way or disproportionately represented. And we've seen that with a whole host of different types of testing. So for example, with heart disease, much of the work that's been done in the past was based on men. So then women were underrepresented. It looked like, oh, women don't actually suffer from heart disease. Well, now we come to see that that's not actually true. But the reason that that came to pass and that we realized that is because we had to think about things a little bit differently. And so I do think a lot about, disparities and how can we get people access, and then how do we track that? And then people say, the numbers don't lie, or it's in the numbers, and that's true. But what comprises the numbers? What are the numbers? What is the denominator? And so when we think about that and making sure that we are really thinking purposefully about making sure that more people are included and involved, that can actually help us all, because that will make sure that the decisions that are made, the policy decisions, the tactical or organizational decisions, regional, they're based on a more complete set of data. And so those are things that I think I'll be busy with for a little bit. And then a related concern or a related thing I've been thinking about a lot is care coordination. Related to equity, but not necessarily 100%, our outcomes in the United States are not as high as similarly developed nations. Obesity rates are rising, there's more complex disease, our lifestyle types of diseases such as cardiovascular disease and diabetic management, we could really stand to improve there. And so that also means people are getting sicker, they're seeing more people, that means they're seeing more specialists and more doctors, et cetera. But then how is all that information being shared? How do you hand off a patient? Who has ownership? And then how do you share all that information in a way that's easy, so that some poor provider isn't looking through printouts or PDFs from 4 different institutions trying to find lab values, for instance, and trying to figure out a plan, or that the patient doesn't have 3 plans by 3 different people and maybe there's some medication mix up or something. So those are the kinds of things that I've been thinking about too, is how can we use technology to actually facilitate coordination, improve handoffs, improve workflow, and versus right now where people kind of feel like, yeah, there's a lot of promise, but what do we actually do with that? And so that's kind of the next couple of things that are on my mind.
Yeah. That's powerful in the sense, like when I think about data, I mean, I think it's just known there's no time in history where we've had as much data as we have now, right? But it's not even about the amount anymore in terms of, we do have a lot of data, but like you mentioned, is it the right data to make the best informed decisions for that? And then how does the data transferred? Who gets access to that information? How do they get access to that information? So just having data in itself is just one step of it, being able to mine it, figuring it out. And I think that's what's just, I think exciting in the sense of just the sheer amount, but also very overwhelming because of the sheer amount. And then recognizing that although there is so much, there's still so much data that's lacking within that realm. So definitely a thing here. So we're going to talk a little bit now about success, and we're kind of create that, talk about success, creating environments for success. But if we take a step back, how would you define success, whether it be personally, professionally, in your work that you do, or maybe over the years?
Yeah, that's a tough one in a way, because sometimes I feel like with success, you get attached to external trappings, your title, your salary, that sort of thing, awards you've won. And those are definitely ways to measure success. But then if nobody wants to work with you and you can't get anything done, then how successful are you? I'm not sure. And similarly, personally, you can have the trappings of success, but then at the end of the day, do you have people that you can count on personally and professionally, and that can count on you? And the reason that I bring that up is because, a lot of things that happen in a career or in life are not necessarily planned. You might have a very purposeful plan. I'm going to go to school for this, then I'm going to do this, so that I'll do that. But then, you might have other opportunities that are available to you because of someone a conversation, perhaps you get involved in a project and you kind of want to get involved there, and it winds up changing your life. So I really think that, yes, there are the external trappings, publications you've done, things you've done, your title, all those things. But then there's also the fact of people wanting to work with you so that you can continue to advance all those things. And I really think they come hand in hand.
Very nice. So there's the element of individual success, and then there's also the element of being successful in whatever it is that you're working on, or the projects, initiatives, being at an institution and whatnot. And so that, even individually and kind of as you go outwards, is kind of the environment that you would create in order to ensure success. So how have you, over the years, or maybe now, created these environments for success to allow yourself to make the impact that you want to make, or allow your teams to be successful?
Yeah, it's interesting because that has definitely changed over time. When you're more junior in your career, you're, I was an individual contributor, and you're typically an individual contributor when you maybe start out. And so then you're really focused on doing a good job, keeping your head down, doing the best you can individually, getting, you want to be known as a hard worker and someone who gets things done, and someone who, is someone that you'd want to have on a team. As you change and move forward, then it's not so much about you, but about your team as well. And so that winds up being a little bit of a shift in thinking, because it's not just about you and what you do, but the success of the team is everyone's success. Even if you haven't directly worked on something, if the team does well, or if a team member does well, then we all do well. And so I think that's something that takes a little bit of time. You don't automatically shift to that thinking, because it's a mental shift from going to think about, well, I could just do that, or versus, well, how do I develop my people and develop our whole team so that we can all be better, and that we can all, move up and do things that we want to do, and make more of an impact. And that is not an easy shift. In theory, you think about it and say, yeah, that makes sense. But in practice, mentally, you have to kind of, it's hard to change from inside, because you're so used to working in one way, then you have to work a different way. And then as you move forward, you have to think more about, well, strategically, where do we want to go as an organization, or as a group, or whatever it is that you have purview over. And then how do I give people, what they need to do that? And so those are all things that it's almost like a progression related to career progression. But, it's something hard to think about when you're kind of in the trenches doing it, because you have to kind of take a step back and think, well, wait a minute, what am I trying to do here? Or what are we all trying to do here? And then how can we all make each other be successful?
Yeah, and to build on that too, in terms of, making sure that others are successful, and kind of helping assist that, and kind of creating this environment for success. We know that sometimes it's difficult, and I know this among many of my colleagues as well, that for when we need help, right, we often are thinking so much about how to help others in order to be successful, but oftentimes we know that we can't do everything ourselves, and we actually have to ask for help and kind of seek out support. So do you have any advice that you can provide to our audience about seeking support, or having those kind of, somewhat, for a lot of people, it might be difficult conversations of asking for help?
It is tough. I agree, because we're so conditioned to want to take on things and kind of do it yourself, or, that sort of thing. A couple of things I would say. One is to identify the help that you need early. Oftentimes people will reach out for help maybe right before a deadline or something like that. And then it's tough, right? Because then the person that you're reaching out to, they don't have the background, they might not have time right away. And then you're really kind of missing out on any contributions they might have provided because they haven't had a chance to think. So one is to kind of think about everything that you have going and where are places that people can help you. And what kind of help do you need? Do you just need an extension of yourself? Do you need a different perspective? Do you need a particular skill set? And so I think almost sometimes it feels like, gosh, asking for help is more work, but if you really kind of take the time to think about it, then you'll wind up with something better, and then you'll have the help that you need in a timely way. And that's something that's hard. I'm not going to say it's easy, because first of all, if you're swamped, you might not even have time to think about what you need. You might just think, I don't know, I just need to clone myself. But, I feel like that actually regularly, but then I have to think, well, I probably should take the time to think about what I need, because then I can't clone myself. So then at least I can get some help in something. And then another thing is, when you do ask for help, think about the things that you can delegate and kind of let go of versus things that you kind of probably need to do yourself. And then if you do delegate it, you need to delegate it. You can't delegate it and then kind of stay in it. And I know it's hard.
Let it go.
That's right. And it's tough. I'm not going to say it's not. I'm giving myself this advice. I'm reminding myself too, because, and that's true personally too. If it's something in your house or if it's something at work, sometimes people don't want to help you if you're like, I'm handing this to you, but then I have, but I'm not really handing it to you, and you have to read my mind and figure out what I really wanted. That doesn't really work, and then people don't develop and grow, whether or not it's your, kids doing a chore and you're like, oh my God, this is taking so much longer, or someone at work who maybe they're learning a new skill, but it helps, it does help get things off your plate, but you have to accept that, no, it's not going to be exactly like I would have done it, but that might not be bad. And then, and you've taken it off your plate and you can focus on other things.
Yeah, no, that's great too. And I think one of our another guest leader also talked about when you the train of thought of thinking about delegation too, is because we often think that if we're going to delegate, we're giving someone else more work. And for some of us that we feel bad about that, right? Like we think like, oh no, but if you actually perceive it and be intentional about whom you delegate it to, and it, like you said, and it gives them a growth opportunity in the sense of building their skills in that area. If they're new and this could really help them learn this area, you're shifting your mentality about it, which allows it to be more generous than it is I'm just throwing my work at somebody, which is really great there. Let's talk a little bit now about leadership. We ask all of our guest leaders the question that how would you describe a leader? And you were just to respond in a couple of sentences. So you said leadership takes courage. There are many ways to exhibit courage as a leader, and some examples include doing the right thing even when it's difficult, ceding control to trust your team, and taking calculated risk. Having courage is how we move forward and make progress. Can you maybe elaborate on this and what really has shaped this outlook for you?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different things. One is, as I said in the beginning, I didn't expect my career to take the turn that it did, but it was because I was able to take advantage of opportunities that were available to me and take risks. Risks can be taking on a new project, taking on a new role, switching industries or jobs or whatever the case might be. And I think that's also true of your team when you're leading a team. If you kind of do the same old thing, you're going to get the same old thing. And so if you want to move forward, it's important to take some calculated risks and and I say calculated, you don't want to take every risk. You don't want to, go crazy with that. But, there are times where you think, well, is it the safe choice that, yes, I can achieve this, or do we want to go beyond the safe choice? And then that will help us move forward. And so, that's one piece of it with the risks. The other thing I said about courage is sometimes, when you're a leader, and particularly if you've moved from being part of a team to leading it, you have to shift your perspective on being liked and what being liked means. You certainly want to be respected, and you don't want everyone to hate you, but you have to kind of think about, how do I make decisions that are for the best of the team and given the big picture, even if they're not necessarily popular. And it's a change, because it's not necessarily something that comes naturally. It's a human impulse to want to fit in with a group and that sort of thing. But you might not be able to do that. And you might not be able to necessarily make decisions that will make everyone happy. There's pretty much no decision that makes everybody happy. And so you kind of have to think about, and I'm a data-driven person, so it's like you take all the information you have, you make the best choice that you have, and then you move forward. And then we talked about this a little bit before with letting go. It takes courage sometimes to let go if you're giving something to someone or to another team, and to let them do it their way, and to kind of resist that impulse to take it back and then see what happens. So those are all kind of interrelated points, but I don't know that people think about, or I don't know that I'd actually thought about until you asked me to give that quote, all of those different things and how they fit together, because they're all sort of disparate points, but they come back to courage and having the kind of internal fortitude to do what you think is right and to kind of maintain that path.
Oh, I really liked your definition. We talk a lot about leadership in general. I mean, leadership is a buzzword in a sense of, how much is written about it, how many conversations are about it. But through the years and, maybe what you're hearing now, what do you think we're getting wrong about leadership?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that in terms of leadership, there's a lot out there. There's a lot of books, there's a lot of principles, there's a lot of there's a lot of things that you could go and look up and search. And I think it's good to look at those things. But one thing that I've seen is that sometimes people take those principles and they apply them, but they're not being true to themselves. So I think, or they're maybe applying them kind of wholesale. And I've seen that with perhaps newer leaders, or even people who maybe they're not, quite sure what to do, so they apply these things. If you're not true to yourself and true to, who you are as a person and your personality and your tendencies, and know those, and then apply leadership within that framework, or leadership principles within that framework, then you're not going to be successful. And I'll take myself as an example. I've said I'm a data-driven person, I'm an action-driven person. So I have to purposely, I don't want to take just the advice that kind of feeds into that, because I know that's what I want to do. I have to purposely look at advice that is counter to my natural tendencies, so that I will actually take a little bit more time, or I will, look at, other types of perspectives, or whatever the case might be. And so I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of taking the advice that you kind of want, and then, or just kind of taking it and applying it, even if it doesn't fit you. But then it does require a little bit of introspection, or, a lot of companies will do, different tests and such. And sometimes I look at them and think, yeah, that's right. But then, you have to think, well, how do I counter the negative aspects and embrace the positive, and then kind of, do that together. Another thing that I think happens with leadership is people think that it's kind of bossing people around. And, there is an element of that. You have to give people direction, and, things have to get done, but it really isn't as, we're not, the times have changed, and it's a lot more of a collaborative environment. And so you have to be, and sometimes you might be in a leadership role, but not have formal leadership power or authority. And so you really kind of have to figure out, well, how do I, kind of get people on board, and how do I get people to want to follow me? And that's true whether or not you have the authority. It'll make things a lot easier. So those are a few things that I think we might benefit from shifting our perspective a little bit, or thinking about a little bit differently.
Yeah. And kind of incorporating more of that kind of authentic leadership your own authentic leadership style, which I think over the years, and I think we've seen this a lot, where women tend to have a little bit more difficulty with this because we feel like we have to, you know, be a certain way over time. I think over the years, it's been very nice about having these conversations about, you know, being able to show the various dimensions of your authentic self within the way that you lead, because you're able to then influence, build trust in different ways. You know, there isn't just one way of doing it. And so I think that allows that. And it kind of integrates with that element of what you discussed initially, right? About, do people like working with you? You know, it's not just about being led or being, you know, told what to do in different elements. So is there some maybe leadership lessons or advice that you can provide our audience? They're at various stages of their career, as they're kind of thinking about this topic, building on what you've said thus far?
Yeah, a couple of things. I do think that it's important to really think about, you know, yourself, and do a test, or, you know, kind of just think about what your tendencies are, and then actively work to think about how those might affect your team, or how those might affect people that you work with, and then what are some things that you can do to counter that. And it can be very simple. It's not like you need to go through and, you know, do a whole like psychological analysis sort of thing. It could even be something as simple as building in time for a brainstorming with, you know, a time for decision making to be done. It doesn't have to be, you know, something crazy that you do, but kind of just thinking about what are some things that, you know, perhaps might make me better as a leader. And then another thing is to think about, you know, what can you let go? And I know I've said that a couple of times, but I think that's something that happens a lot, is, you know, what people don't necessarily think about, what are the things that I really need to kind of keep? And because there are things that you just have to, versus things that, you know, I can probably let someone else do that, and then, you know, get the results later. So that's something else. And then also, you know, really trusting your team and developing them. Developing your team members takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of effort. However, when you do that, everyone benefits. Your team doesn't want to stay stagnant either. They don't want to just stay in their same role. People want to progress and they want to develop. And so by helping them to do that in a way that perhaps also aligns with the goals of the team, everybody works out better in the end. So those are a few things. And one last thing I would say is as a woman, you know, people react to us in an authoritative position differently than they react to men. I've seen that many times myself. And this might not be advice that everybody wants to take, but I've kind of started calling things out a little bit more. And you don't have to be a jerk about it, but, you know, if someone, you know, automatically maybe discounts a point, or, you know, automatically maybe asks the woman to take notes or something like that, I will try to rotate things around, or I will, you know, kind of say something. And that is something that not everyone is comfortable doing. And, you know, you might want to think about your own style, but I sort of feel like if we all don't do that little by little, then things don't really change. And so that's something that, you know, I've also think that if you are in a leadership role, it's kind of our responsibility for the women coming up behind us to do that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Now we're going to just do this last question before we go into some of the audience questions that we received. And we always kind of like to end this section with, you know, taking an opportunity to really support one another and really recognize the positive influence we have on one another. Can you name a woman or two, because people have cheated, who has inspired you, and why did you choose this person?
Yeah, there's so many. One person that came to my mind was Sonia Sotomayor, the Supreme Court Justice. She really came from very humble beginnings. And she, you know, her father died when she was very young, raised by a single mom. And she has really made the most of the opportunities available to her. And that has projected her career and really made it so that she makes a difference for all of us as Americans, because as a Supreme Court Justice, the decisions that she makes, the things that she's involved with, are, you know, impact us all. And she has also an example of leadership without necessarily authority, because as an associate justice, she is not the Chief Justice, so she's not in charge of the court. However, she will have to write briefs, and a lot of the work of the Supreme Court involves kind of negotiations and discussions and kind of making your points known and that sort of thing. So I think that she's definitely one. Another thing that it's not one person, but I did want to mention that a lot of the beauty CEOs previously were men, and now we've seen more women of color, like for both Chanel and L'Oreal and all these places. And I think that's so interesting that the beauty industry is largely marketed towards women, but the leaders were all men. And so I'm really kind of happy to see now that, and it's actually interesting to me that it was in the news because it's so novel that there are women and women of color in those positions. And so I just wanted to mention that because I think that those are things that you don't necessarily think about, but might influence, this large industry that's geared towards us. So why maybe it should be led by one of us. So those are a few things that I've noted. And there's so many examples. It was really hard for me to think of someone. There's people across fields and sports and politics all over the place, but I managed to settle it on those.
Yeah, I love that you made that because I've been thinking about that lately too, because I feel like there's more conversations around that just because you are seeing more women of color too, specifically too, being in these leadership positions. And it's to not take for granted that you would think in certain industries that it would make sense, right? Like you would just think, well, of course, why shouldn't there be women leaders in this space? But like you said, traditionally there has not. And now this is kind of novel for an area that you would assume. And so I think, the real big takeaway from that is, don't assume that it's just a given position. We all really do have to work towards, making sure that the right individuals are represented in different decision-making positions in order to adequately represent the different communities in which they're serving. So, and to be able to get those insights. So now we're just going to go over some of the audience questions that we had. And so there's been several of them that have kind of been consistent with the theme of engaging diverse stakeholders, having conversations around or conversations with people that might not maybe think the same way you do or have a specific perspective on the matter at hand. So, what advice would you give our audience? And again, we got so many questions pertaining to this, but around, having effective conversations and being able to, make an impact in an area where you're engaged with people that think very differently than you.
Yeah, that is a tough one because oftentimes when you come up a certain way, you're trained a certain way, you work, in a certain field, then you tend to view problems through that lens. I tend to view problems as data or information problems because that's, my background. But by getting, an understanding of where other people have, what their background is and where they came from, and then looking at the language that they use, I think you can actually gain a lot. So my advice is kind of to listen and you think about the words they use, the problems they describe, the things that are a priority to them. And then that will really help to inform your work generally. And I think that, spending time to really kind of understand, what do they mean when they say this term? So one example is the term urgent. Within healthcare, depending on, say you're in a hospital, depending on where in the hospital you are, urgent can mean like 4 different things. Yeah. And so the same thing is true with different stakeholders across, if you're looking at IT or looking at different things, with terminology, understanding kind of what they mean and then understanding what their priorities are and then how they use terminology. I think those are the things that will really help. Yeah. And it's important because nothing really happens in a vacuum. The work that you do, the impact of your work, all of these things really rely on different stakeholders. So understanding where they're coming from is really valuable. And not only in the working relationship that you have, but also in the output of what you produce.
Yeah, for sure. There's one question about what's the worst advice you have been given?
Well, I've been given a lot of advice. So one piece of advice that I was given in kind of more the beginning of my career was to keep my head down and work hard, which you might think, well, that's not bad advice. And it's not, but it is bad because in the context of it, it was kind of like, don't speak up and don't put yourself out there. Just kind of do what you're assigned and kind of don't complain. And that was kind of how it was meant. And I actually don't think that part is good advice. I think it's important to put yourself out there for different opportunities. And especially as women, we are often overlooked for different types of positions where there's been studies out there that men are promoted on potential and women are promoted. You almost have to have the job and be doing it already.
Yeah.
And so, but in order to do that and move up, you have to take opportunities, and people aren't going to hand you opportunities. You sort of need to be out there and grab opportunities, or make it known that you'd like to do different things, and make it known that you're not just wait for someone to say, you've been doing a great job, I'm going to promote you, but to try to, be out there a little bit more. And so it might seem at its face that that's not bad advice, but it kind of is in a way, because if you do that, you won't progress. So yes, work hard, and yes, don't, keep your head down at certain times, but it's also important to kind of put yourself out there internally and externally, make it known that you'd like to do different things, speak up if you see something in a respectful way, of course, that perhaps you'd like to change or be involved with, and then, continue to work hard.
Yeah. Yeah, because even just thinking about potential is very outward facing, in the sense that when you're having conversations with people and they're seeing also that potential in you, even you might have not had that, but it's external, right? Like you have to build upon that in order to do that. There is a question here about let me see, there's just so many. How do you prioritize what you want to work on?
Yeah, time prioritization is so tough. I feel like that's the resource I have the least of, is time. And so, I used to say yes to everything, or it's hard to say no, right? You don't feel like, oh, I feel uncomfortable kind of saying no to that. And so now, you can't do everything though. That's just sort of, how it is. So I usually think about a couple of things. One is, there are, operationally, sometimes there's things you have to do, so you kind of can't say no. But then if you can, how do you figure out what you want to do? So how does something fit into my goals, either for the future, or maybe I have a publication goal, maybe I have an operational goal, maybe I need to, I've been really wanting to advance this body of work, kind of like what I did with virtual care. And so if something doesn't fit into one of my main areas of interest, I've started to find someone else maybe that is their area of interest on the team, and kind of direct people that way. And then, sometimes there are things that, maybe I'm not the right person. And so in the past, I might have tried to, figure it out. But now I think, well, there is someone else who could probably do it. And so maybe we should look at things that way. Or maybe I'm just not the right, maybe people want to give me things because I do like to get things done, but then that'll make some of my other things suffer. So you kind of have to look at kind of the overall, like what's on your plate, and then what serves you in the future, and then what you can, where you can make an impact, and then decide from there. And it's not easy. I feel like these are constant negotiations. You're always trying to figure out, what do I want to do? And that can be personally too. Do I want to serve on a board? Do I want to, do this volunteer opportunity or that one? Or, but when you think of time as a finite resource, almost like money, and it's almost like you have a budget and you have to figure out the best way to allocate. And that's, one way to think about, how do you want to allocate that? And then that will help with those decisions, but it's not easy.
Yeah, for sure. We'll just do one more question before we close out. And I think this one's a very interesting one, because I think we hear a lot about building success, or, doing the things that you would need to do in order to be successful. And one of them is consistency. So this question is, what do you consistently do?
Oh, that's a good one. So a couple things that I consistently do personally that I think help me professionally. I am a consistent exerciser. I don't always do it very long, but I will do a workout in the morning, and I'm a morning person for that. I used to try to do it after work, and I think I just got too busy with everything, and it didn't happen. But if I do it in the morning, get it out of the way, then I feel like I have better energy. I feel like I've already done something productive before I've gone to work. And then obviously it's good. There's health benefits and such too. So that's one thing that I'm pretty consistent at. And I think that another thing that I do consistently is I'm a big reader. I love to read, and I read all different types of things. And this is another one. I don't always spend all the time doing it, but by reading a bunch of different things, and reading fiction and nonfiction, all kinds of things, even a little bit a day, it kind of helps to expand my mind. And then I think that by doing that, that helps me at, both personally because I enjoy it, but also professionally because it helps me to think about things in a different way. So those are two habits that I like. There's other habits that I wish I had, like drinking more water and all that kind of stuff. But those I try, but I'm not as consistent on those.
There's so many habits. That's the thing is, it's like, if you want to be consistent, there's only so many habits that you can kind of keep up all at once. I think people assume you have to have like a laundry list of, habits and then do that every day. And it's just like your ability to be successful to consistently do multiple things goes down if the list keeps going up and up. Yeah. And so, you're not going to be able to do it as consistently. But we are at time, and I do, want to be respectful of your time, and truly do appreciate you coming onto this series. And I've absolutely loved our conversation, and I know that our audience will as well. But are there any final thoughts or anything that you would like to add to what we've spoken about thus far?
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was fun. It was really nice to be able to kind of take stock of, my career and some of the principles and things that have guided me. And then the thing that I would tell people is really to be true to yourself. And I know that sounds a little hokey, but honestly, if you are doing something that deep down you kind of know you don't like it, in the end, you probably won't be happy with it. So really, if if it's changing your leadership style, kind of continue to maintain your core. That will really help guide you with decisions you make, with things you do, with how you spend your time. And so I know it might sound a little cheesy, but I think by keeping the core of who you are consistent and making your decisions from there, it will really serve you.
Yeah, definitely the reflection and being authentic and kind of understanding and looking at all the data that you have thus far.
That's right.
Keeping with that data theme. But thank you so much again. And for everybody, we do have several other leaders in the series, so please stay tuned. You are able to submit your questions ahead of time on our website. And then, of course, if you want to watch previous guest leaders, they're all available on our site as well. So thank you again, and hope to see everyone at the next session or the next.
Thank you.
Take care.